To be honest, it's been on my list for a long time. I've actually had the book for a long time, and I never got around to reading it. I started reading it, and it was kind of dense, and I put it down. But I always knew that, like, I've heard so many people rave about this book that I knew I wanted to come back to it at some point. And so I thought, if Joe holds me accountable, I'll actually read it.
Hey, there
And
you
I'm
go.
glad I did.
Nice. So for the listeners, we're talking about The Obstacle is the Way. And this was actually very fitting, Mike, because I had this one on my list as well. And I don't think I told you that, but I have had this one, according to my notes, it's been on my list for close to a year now. But I don't know that I guess I don't know why I wasn't bringing it up right away as something to read. But I definitely think it's fitting as far as seasons of life, at least that I'm in right now. It was very, very interesting. But the premise behind it is primarily you have a big obstacle in your life. There's a big roadblock that you've come up against, and what do you do about it? Well, how do you handle that? And Ryan Holiday, the author, he takes us on this journey of how to see and work with these obstacles and how to see those as the process and the direction that you should go. Is that fair, Mike?
Yeah. And this is actually, I thought it was kind of funny. On the cover of this book, he's got a quote from Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art, which is the last book that we talked about. And I thought this
I
book
saw
was
that.
very complimentary to that one.
Oh yeah, easy. It kind of felt. I would say that the authors, they between Stephen Pressfield and Ryan Holiday, they have very different styles. And with Ryan Holiday, this particular one plays into the War of Art very well because Pressfield talks a lot about, like we talked about last time, of fighting resistance and basically forcing yourself to continue to create. And then Ryan steps in here and is like, that obstacle of fighting and dealing with that resistance, that's the direction you should go. Like that's at least that's the way I took it. It was interesting.
Yeah, so kind of like the War of Art, this one's broken down into very short chapters. There's a couple sections, just like the War of Art. And the chapters are all basically a couple pages long, revolving around a central idea. But what I really liked about this book was all of the stories that he used to illustrate his points. He has a lot of, in particular, historical stories. So people who aren't made up, who actually live this stuff out. And most of the people that he talks about, I have a good enough understanding of that. It's not that you have to take him at his word when he says this is what's happening. Like, enough about the story to be like, yeah, that makes sense. I can totally see that because I know what happened. And I see that this is the technique that they leveraged to overcome that obstacle, so to speak.
Yeah, that was interesting. And that, I didn't take a lot of notes on this as we were talking about earlier, but one of the things I did write down was that I loved the history that he brought into this because it wasn't just about like just explaining the concepts. He at least showed examples of, I guess, the patriarchs of our past that have done some very difficult things like Rockefeller, Ulysses Grant. Like there's just a lot of, I guess, what would you say, massive figures in the past that have done some pretty amazing things. And he was very good about showing each individual aspect, or he would bring out a story that showed a specific aspect. And that, at least for me, that helps me relate quite a bit. So I was kind of interested in that. It made me actually write down some names that I wanted to go, because there was a few of them that I'd heard of the names, but I didn't know a whole lot about them. And that's probably my own ignorance and not paying attention in history class, if I'm going to confess that. But it was interesting enough that I was trying to figure out if there were like biographies about some of these people because they were very interesting. And I want to know more about Rockefeller. I'm just curious what all he did.
Right. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln was another one that he mentioned. Like they're all names that you have at least heard of before. You're a little bit familiar with, even if you didn't pay attention to history class, which I'd have to confess I wasn't real great at either. But the historical figures are interesting because right at the beginning of the book, he talks about how, and this is a quote, he says, "We live in the most prosperous time in history. our obstacles are internal. So a lot of the people that he talks about overcame external obstacles, but that really resonated with me. We're not fighting a civil war to end slavery, and we don't deal with a lot of the things that they dealt with in history, in the past. But we all have these struggles and these obstacles that we have to overcome. And he said it this way another place. He says, many of our problems come from having too much. We're soft, entitled, and scared of conflict. Great times are great softeners. So that did two things for me. One, it first of all kicked me in the pants and made me realize that maybe some of the things that I think are obstacles or situations need to change, it's really maybe not so bad, which that's a whole another topic.
Yeah.
He gets into that in the first section. But the other thing was that, our conflicts are internal. If you have internal conflicts, internal obstacles that you have to overcome, that is normal. You are normal. You are okay. There's nothing wrong with you. You just have to.
It's similar to what Pressfield was getting at. Like we have this internal battle.
Yep.
We just have to deal with ourselves.
Right. And then he breaks down the book into the three sections, which is basically perception, action, and will. You want to kind of go through these maybe one by one?
Yeah, I think so. Because at least the first two, specifically because it changed how I thought about things quite a bit. So I'll just jump in there. The first one he talks about is perception, and essentially what he's getting at in that section is choosing how you see an obstacle. So you have this trial that's come your way, and your perception on that trial is pretty important, and it can dictate how you come at the trial. For example, if, say, my car breaks down whenever I'm trying to go home after a long day at work, that's really traumatic, honestly, because I wanted to get home, and living in the Twin Cities, traffic is never fun, which means you're going to have people flying by you, and it's a very dangerous situation. So it's very difficult to see that as anything positive and can be quite frightening, honestly. And that whole first section just made me stop and think about a lot of these difficulties that we all have a lot of things that we deal with right now. We're so busy, it's hard to find somebody who doesn't have something going on that they're dealing with in some form. At least if they say they don't, just keep asking questions. You'll eventually find it. And I feel like if you take a lot of what Ryan is getting at here, he makes you stop and think about how you perceive those difficulties and look for the positive side of those. I don't know what the positive side would be of being stranded on the side of the road with a broken down car, but that's essentially what he's trying to help you do, is think about it in that way of looking for the positive.
Yeah, and he would even say that that's not a bad event. He would say that there would be positive that could come of that. That was the thing that I really got out of this first section, was that things are what they are, but looking at them as events and not coloring them with a cognitive bias of being either good or bad. Just, this is the way things are, let's deal with it.
Because even, look at the terms I'm using whenever I explain that. It's frightening. It's a terrible thing that my car broke down. Well, that's me overlaying my bad perception on top of that situation.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And he uses some pretty crazy examples to illustrate people who kind of have this down. I think one of them was the Ulysses Grant example where he was getting his picture taken or something, and then some guy fell through the window, like right next to him from the roof, and almost killed him, and he wasn't even fazed by it.
Didn't even move. It's like, I would have jumped out of my chair. Like, there's no way I'm gonna sit there like that.
Yeah, and the term that he used for that reaction, which I thought was awesome, and I wrote it down, was Sangfroid, I think is how you say it. Say Ngfroid, which is unflappable coolness under pressure. So that's one of my takeaways, is to develop the ability to be Sangfroid.
So you're going to put that on your computer like on the screen so you can look at it all the time? Just don't.
I think I'm gonna have to. Yeah, I love that word.
Are you one of these guys that puts like the Post-its on the screens? Are you one of these?
Occasionally, I'll do Post-its.
You do? Okay. It drives me bonkers. I've seen some people that do that, and I can't do it.
It's not normal. Usually, if I want something that I want to be able to see all the time, I'll have it framed. I'll put it on my wall.
Yeah,
so
see, that's what
Like,
I'll do.
Yeah, I've got a couple things like that in my office, but I generally do not keep Post-its on my monitor.
I used to work with a guy that did that, and he would put Post-its on the screen, but in my thinking, if you're going to do that, like if there's something like this that you want to keep around and you're going to stick something on your computer monitor, like do it at the bottom so it hangs off the bottom of the screen. He would stick them at the top so that they would be overlapping the screen.
So your cursor could be gone behind a Post-it note?
Yes, or like if it's a Mac, you would miss your whole toolbar up there. Like the whole menu bar is gone.
I don't think I could use my computer without my menu bar.
I'm not sure this is a good idea. Anyway, not to get us too far off track there, but if there's something you want to keep around, don't cover your computer screen, please.
Right. But saying Freud, I may have to make an exception for, because that's just so cool.
Well, just don't write it on the screen itself, okay?
All right.
But it was interesting that he had some of these historical stories where difficult things happen and like Rockefeller just didn't care. Like, okay, there's bad things going on. Great. How can I take advantage of that? Well, that's not the way I think. I don't think that way. It's like if something bad happens, I'm upset about it and it's a difficulty. But even saying that it's a bad thing isn't correct. That's just my perception of the situation.
Yep, exactly. He said, this can't harm me. I might not have wanted it to happen, but I decide how it will affect me. No one else has the right. And I really liked his word choice right there. I think that's really a really important distinction, that you can only control what you can control. And he talks about I think it's the Serenity Prayer. In the book. But that's a really important thing, is like realizing that there's some things that you just can't control. So there's no use getting bent out of shape if that stuff happens. Control the things you can control. And then the stuff that you can't control, figure out how to leverage it. There's this thing called the procrastination leads to blame leads to victim thinking cycle. And the basic idea, and I think this applies to most people who don't intentionally try to break this. I think this is kind of the default, especially with our culture today. It's like, it's not your fault, which that may be true, but it doesn't matter how you start. He talks about that later. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. What matters is what you do from this point forward. So what most people will do is they'll procrastinate on something, and then that will lead them to project blame when those things that happen that they can't control. They'll blame someone or something else for that resulting circumstance. And then ultimately, if they get held accountable, they say, I'm a victim. And that's the whole victim thinking mentality. But it starts with the procrastination. A lot of times, if we would just take action on the things that we should be doing, we can overcome the need to blame anybody. We can overcome feeling like a victim. We can conquer that obstacle just by taking a little bit of action. So at Agent Efficiency, we talk about solar flaring, and I think we maybe even mentioned that in one of our previous podcasts. But the idea that you take a little bit of action, and that's going to translate into more results than you think. It kind of leverages the compound effect to produce multiplied results. And we have this, I use the word again, cognitive bias a lot of times. Oh, something is so hard. It's so impossible. That giant is so big. That obstacle is so big. I'll never be able to overcome it. When really, when we finally muster up the strength to run at it, it's like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of difficulty, I think, in that, though. And that's why there's a book on it here, is when we have something that's a challenge or something happens to us, like you're saying with the victim thinking, it's really easy to just focus on that and get upset about it. I mean, just look at anybody can open Twitter or any sort of social media of any kind, and finding people who are offended is just incredibly way too easy.
Yeah.
And when we get offended over things, it's too easy to fall into that. Instead of getting offended about it and throwing a hissy fit and just going on rants about it, if you're a celebrity, maybe that's a good thing because then you can drive publicity on something. But for most of us, that's not the case. Instead, we're better off understanding that, yes, something bad is happening. Politics don't go the way I want them to. It's just life. And if I just understand that some of these difficult things happen and then decide to do something about it, I mean, that's the whole second part of this book is taking action on it. And if you take some of those difficult things and do something with it, you can actually start to drive something positive out of it instead of just seeing it as a negative and getting upset about it.
Exactly. And it may be something that is quote unquote negative. It's not something you would have chosen to have happen. But then what do you do from that point forward? You can't change what happened in the past. You just have to deal with it and overcome it. He says it this way. He says, through our perception of events, we are complicit in the creation as well as the destruction of every one of our obstacles. I think a lot of times we create obstacles instead of destroy them because we choose to play the victim card and we choose to say, oh, things didn't go exactly how I would have liked them to go. But we talked about that when we talked about the willpower instinct, about how people have this bias where they project that everything's going to go perfectly, and that's never the way it happens. So there's always an opportunity to play that victim card. There's always an opportunity to make an excuse for the obstacle that is in the way. And this book really just encouraged me to not take that view. Whenever I run into that obstacle, first of all, just slow down, recognize that it's there. Don't judge it as good or bad. And then, okay, what do we do with this thing? Because there is a way to overcome this, and you just got to figure out what that is.
Now, one of the things I mentioned, I don't know if this was before we started recording or not, Mike, but was that I started reading this book at exactly the right time because I recently, as we're recording this, I recently made a fairly significant business decision. Now, I can't tell you what that is, but it essentially meant that I made the largest financial investment into an opportunity that I've ever made. And it is kind of like a self-imposed obstacle and a self-imposed trial because it puts me in a spot financially not bad, but it means that I just have to hustle a little bit more. And it's not like it's a difficult thing. It just means I have to be conscious about it. Now, I got to thinking about that, and it kind of made me wonder if that had happened, say it wasn't an investment, say it was, some markets tanked or something and I had my money in a bad spot. If something happened and I just lost that money, then would I come at it differently? And prior to this book, I would probably say, yeah, I would probably be a bit upset and wallow in it for a few days and just waste a couple of days, I guess, just worrying about what's going to happen next. And I can see how that can create a cycle and a pit of inaction and just drive that whole victim mentality. And this is perfect timing because I was probably halfway through this book whenever I was trying to make this decision to do it. And whenever I finally said yes, wire the money and go, then it was kind of a trigger at that point of, okay, this is going to be difficult. I need to work my tail off. I need to do some things. But just sitting and trying to figure it out isn't going to do anything. So this is go all the way back to the first book we read, Getting Things Done. What's the next action? And how do I bring myself and will myself through self-control and working through the resistance? I mean, you can start to tie all these books that we've talked about into this. And how do I drive myself to action and make that a habit? And I think Ryan Holiday does a great job here of kind of creating motivation instead of, it's not like a scientific stance. I mean, we've talked about scientific studies quite a bit here on the podcast already, and he doesn't really get into that. He's using a lot of story to drive the point home, and I think that's exactly what I needed right at this moment because it's something that creates the drive and the motivation. I don't know a different word for it. Drives the motivation to get started on some things, and even in the short amount of time that I've made that decision to try to do that action, it's paid off big already. So it has been a perfect timing, because even though there's a difficulty in front of me, it's nice to have that motivation and understanding of, okay, just understand what's happening and choose to see it as a positive thing, and then get your butt in gear and get moving.
Yeah.
So there's my rant
No,
on that.
that's really good. And I would even add, not even necessarily choose to see it as a positive thing. In your specific instance, that makes a lot of sense, because it's a decision that you've made. But another thing that I was thinking of when I was reading this book, and you can cut this part out if you want, I'm not trying to get political, but Great Britain has just
Okay.
voted to leave the European Union. Okay, so I know a lot of people
right, yeah.
who are in a real tough spot with their businesses now, and the ones I would wager that are going to be successful are the ones who are going to be able to look at this situation and figure out, how do I make the best out of this? Because I'm sure, I don't know all the politics, I don't know all the details, but my experience has been that when stuff like this happens, there's usually opportunities there for the people that can see them. And he kind of talks about that a little bit with, I think he mentioned Rockefeller in this book.
Yeah, that was the primary. When it came to finances in an economic downturn, that was the one he brought up. It was like right
Yep.
at the beginning too, I think.
So real life example of the importance of this stuff. There are a whole bunch of people who literally overnight have to develop these skills. And I guess I would say, for anybody who is thinking about reading the book, pedal before the hill, develop these skills, develop this mindset before you get to that point where it's sink or swim. He has a phrasing that I wrote down that I really liked. He says, when you catch yourself worrying, you should ask yourself, what am I choosing not to see right now? I think a lot of times we miss those opportunities because we're blinded, we're jaded, we have that cognitive bias. I'm probably going to say that a lot. Hopefully I'm not. but it's true. Like we choose to see things a certain way because of how we are feeling right now. And if we can just see it for what it is and figure out how to solve this puzzle, make the most out of this particular situation, I can totally see how that is a very, very valuable life skill. Have you seen the movie Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or read the book, I guess, but the movie is the one that kind of introduced me to the book.
I have not read the book, and I'm going to confess here, Mike. I have tried to watch the movie about 3 times.
Okay, well,
It's not for me. I'm just going to say that. And
I'm going to make you watch it with me sometime, because I thought the same thing. It's a brilliant movie. Book is really good, but they have a phrase in there, "Don't panic," and that's what I thought of the whole time I'm reading all this stuff. Don't panic. Don't panic. Don't go anywhere without your wonderful towel.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up the whole Brexit thing, because it's a situation where a lot of people freak out, and think of the economic downturn in 2008. That was very traumatic from a national standpoint, but there were, at the time, and I wasn't in a place to do this, but I had some people around me who were seeking a lot of financial advice from professional financial advisors, and a lot of people were talking about how to pull money out. And I had a couple who I would call sages, a couple of these mentors that were in my life at the time, that were dumping money into the markets left and right. And it just made zero sense to me at the time. And now I'm sitting here looking at it thinking, you guys are
Yep.
geniuses. Like, that was awesome. And I look back to, like, my grandfather did something similar in the 80s with farm ground. And it was a scenario where a lot of people freak out. A lot of people just get really emotional, and they see it as a very bad thing. But if you've prepared for difficult times, it's a lot easier to, in this whole scenario. And the book has a lot of references to Stoicism, and I'm no expert on Stoicism, but from what I read here, I can resonate with a lot of it. But there's a lot of instances, especially when you get to finances, because I think that's the one piece of this that a lot of people can really relate to. But there are instances where massive economic, not failure, but downturns happen, And if you're ready for them, then you can analyze those rationally instead of emotionally. That was a lot of what I got out of the book here, Mike, is that there's an awful lot of think about it rationally and don't get emotional.
Yeah.
If you can see that correlation.
Yep, absolutely. Opportunities are everywhere. What also was interesting about this is like he talks about Rockefeller, but he talks about where Rockefeller started before he was Rockefeller, before he had billions of dollars or whatever.
Right.
You know, he made the point that most people actually start from a disadvantaged situation. And so, like Rockefeller, he could have looked at his situation. He could have looked at the circumstances of where he was at that time and said, you know, it's just not going to happen for me. It's not in the cards. But that's not obviously what happened. And I think that's really important. He also talked about Steve Jobs called it a reality distortion field.
Right.
Where you're tuning out all of the things that don't matter and you're focusing in on the things that do matter. He said that where the head goes, the body will follow. Perception precedes action. Right action follows the right perspective. And that was the big thing for me, was make sure that you are seeing things right, because when you're seeing things right, the right actions are kind of a natural progression from that. I think that it becomes pretty obvious what the right thing to do is when you see the thing right. A lot of times we don't see the thing right, and that's why it's valuable to have people that you can bounce stuff off of, other perspectives. You know, people can show you your blind spots, show you what you're missing in a particular situation, but then the ability to sort all of that stuff out, weigh all the different criteria, all the different inputs, and see what's actually happening. And then when you see what's actually happening, I believe, like the title of the book, The Obstacle is the Way. The way then becomes clear. Because this, and maybe we can kind of transition into the next section here. He says that action is commonplace. A lot of people will react to a specific situation or circumstance, but it might not be the right thing. So action is commonplace, right action is not. And I think it all really comes down to how you see that event, because as he said, the worst thing that can happen is not the event. It's even if it's the worst thing that you can think of, the worst thing that could actually happen is not that particular event. It's that event happening plus you losing your head and not being able to see things the way that they are.
It's true. It's true. I mean, you think about any scenario you've had in life when something happened and you really didn't want it to happen, and it causes you to lose your head, and time it's all said and done, you've made it worse. And there are a lot of instances I can think of growing up whenever I've done this, and it's only it's funny how kids will sometimes take that out of you. It's chaos in the house, and yet you're able to sometimes, not always, see through that and see, okay, what on earth is going on here, and then try to figure out, what did you guys just do? Like, what were you thinking? And to us, it's just second nature sometimes to see something that happened, and then it's like, okay, what happened, and then what needs to happen next? Whereas so many times, especially with little kids, something happens, the toy breaks, and it's the end of the world. Like everyone is gonna stop everything and come listen to how bad this is for me. Well, you have to grow up at some point and get past that. There's a lot of that mentality that sticks around, which is kind of sad, honestly. And I think that if we can see situations, realize that they don't, like our perception on them can dictate how we act on them, and choosing to do it the right way and keep going and not just get something started and then just let it drop off. I think that's where a lot of the real power in our decisions comes from, because there's a lot of opportunity to drive towards things that could make you more successful. You pick your own definition of what successful means there. But there's a lot of instances where something happens and I know how I want to react. I think an email, like you get an email, I hate email, and or something that's like, I don't want that. And there's always my response that I can type out immediately, and I want to hit send, but I know how many times do people tell us, wait a night, like sleep on it before you send it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of value in that, and I think that's the mindset that the book is driving at is, take some time, think about it, think through your actions, and don't just react, because at least for me, my reaction in most cases is going to be a negative action instead of the right action, to use his terms.
Yep. And right action is going to lead you to your future, your desired end that you really want. He has a really good story about Teddy Roosevelt. Do you remember that one?
I am attempting to recall it at the second.
Okay, well, basically, Teddy Roosevelt was born into a wealthy family, but when he was 12 years old, he had asthma so bad that he would have an attack or something like that. His body was so weak, basically, that he would get sick for weeks at a time and not be able to do anything. And his father basically built him a gym at their house. And he said, I can show you what to do, but you have to make your body. And Teddy Roosevelt at 12 years old actually responded by saying, I'm going to make my body. And so he worked out basically until he overcame not only asthma, but if you study his story more than what is in this particular book, it talks, he went on to become like a really good boxer. He was a naturalist, so he was outside doing stuff all the time. All these things that at 12 years old, doctors said there's no way you're going to be able to do any of that. But it's a really good example of how it's not really where you start. It's how you start, but how you finish. So he has a phrase he uses. He says, we take weakness for granted. We take our current situation, the fact that we can't do a certain thing, for granted. And then we assume that the way that we're born is simply the way we are and that our disadvantages are permanent, and then we atrophy from there. And the Teddy Roosevelt example just really was a great example of the complete opposite of that, I thought, where he started in a very disadvantaged situation, but instead of atrophying, he was intentionally focused on doing the right things. And he didn't waste his crisis, so to speak. Like Ryan Holiday talks about, don't waste your crisis, use it to create action. He created action. And then he has another concept. He says, think progress, not perfection. So we know where we want to go. We have a goal. Even after we've developed the ability to perceive things well, it's still not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen with the snap of your fingers. You have to do those little things right. It's the habits. It's the rituals that you create. It's the compound effect. But that constant progress is really, really important. And he had a couple stories in there that really illustrated that, which I thought was really, really good and was really encouraging for anybody who is going to pick this book up and read it. You're going to probably look at yourself and say, well, I can't do what this other person is doing because of X. I don't have this particular skill. I don't have this particular tool. I don't have, fill in the blank. But this whole book is about taking that particular situation and overcoming it, no matter what it looks like, no matter what the obstacle is. Like, that was the cool thing about this to me, is I know at the beginning he talks about how a lot of our obstacles now are internal, but I saw a lot of general application of the stuff that he was talking about, but yet it still seemed like he was speaking directly to my specific situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very true. And if you think, and maybe if you think about the book in some of the tips and tidbits that he had throughout it, there's a lot of like productivity stuff in there. I don't know if you caught on to that a lot, but there's a lot of develop this habit, do a little bit every day.
My favorite,
keep the process going.
My favorite thing I think in the entire book was replace fear with the process, which I interpreted to mean create a system for overcoming your obstacle, whatever it is.
Yeah. But there's just a lot of that. At one point he was talking about morning rituals and how that was used to overcome things. And there's bringing up and developing this recurring practice of, what do I want to say? Other than habits, recurring actions that help you to beat this obstacle. Just keep pounding away at it. There's stories about that in there. And then the iteration process of get something out there and then continue to tweak it and alter it until it's overcoming the trial that you're dealing with. And there's a lot of that, you and I work in this productivity space pretty heavily. And within that, there's a lot of let's be highly effective, let's work on the right things, let's take on the correct projects. And there's so much of this focus and chip away at it mindset. And that's the mindset he's talking about. And it's easy for you and I to talk about and write about it. And I don't know about you, but it's just a constant battle to continue to do the habits and continue working on things every day, because you get tired of them. You do get tired of it. And it seems like even with, as a writer and someone who writes for a blog in that productivity space, sometimes it's hard to keep coming up with something different, because I have people that write to me and tell me that they're looking for the extra awesome tip that helps them achieve an extra 20 minutes in a day. Like, I have people asking me this stuff, and that's not the point. It's like, that's not the idea here. The idea is to make sure that whenever you do have that 20 minutes, that you're spending it on the right thing. And just trying to find an extra 20 minutes, that doesn't get you anything. Like, you still have other obstacles to overcome.
Exactly. And actually at Asian Efficiency, one of the things we get all the time is the right tool or the right app. And the right tool or the right app isn't going to make any difference because you don't have the system in place to use it correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But people think that is the magic bullet. If I just knew this one trick, if I just had this one app, if I just had this one tool, then everything is going to be easier. And I guess that's why this book resonated with me so much, is it articulated very well, better than I could ever have done it myself, but it was in line with a lot of my belief systems that those things aren't going to make the difference. What's going to make the difference is what you decide to, first of all, how you see this obstacle that you're trying to overcome, and then what you're going to do about it. Because I think everybody can relate to the feeling that I can't do this thing that so-and-so is doing because of fill in the blank. There's always going to be those excuses. And he says in the book, he says, nobody is born with a steel backbone. We have to forge that ourselves. We have to overcome those feelings of inadequacy. We have to do the things that probably those people did in the first place. They showed up and they blogged every day and they built that audience. That doesn't mean that we can't do the same thing. But you'll have far better luck toughening yourself up than trying to take the teeth out of a world that is at best indifferent to your existence. I absolutely love that quote from the book. And it's so true. A lot of times we look for the universe to just create a way, the heavens to open, the illumination to come. This is the way to go. All you've got to do is this. And that's why those tips, those tools, those apps, those are always the most popular posts, is because people are looking for that one thing. It's much more than one thing, but it's also a lot simpler than learning how to use a new tool. It's simple, but it's not easy, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
This book really, it's to get the core ideas, it's longer than it needs to be. I wouldn't argue that it's too long. I absolutely loved reading it, but really it comes down to the perception, the action, and the will. If you understand those basic ideas and actually apply them, then you'll get the results. But I think that it almost, when he first presents it in the first section of the book, he's like, this is how I'm going to lay this out. I'm going to lay it down in these 3 sections. That section alone is really all of the core content that you would need to apply. But the rest
of authors wouldn't do that.
Well,
don't tell me what you're going to do. Just do it.
I generally would agree, but I feel like the rest of this book, and even with the title, The Obstacle is the Way, I think that's part of the reason I had trouble picking it up and reading it, is like, I don't want to read about obstacles. Like,
yeah.
Why do I want to be reminded of how hard things are? But then the rest of the book, I feel like he does a really, really good job of, it's almost like a pep rally. It's encouraging you to go ahead and try this stuff, because it does actually look, it worked for Rockefeller. It worked for Teddy Roosevelt. It worked for Ulysses Grant. It worked for all these other people. It will work for you. So I don't know. I really like it, but he really, the whole thing can kind of be encapsulated, I believe, in another quote that he had in the book. It says, the path of least resistance is a terrible teacher. I've heard it said another way: resist the path of least resistance,
Yeah.
because it's not going to lead you anywhere. That obstacle is the way. That's the way to the future that you want.
I want to come back to the parallel of the productivity apps because, for example, I'm a heavy OmniFocus user, and that particular tool is one that I write about quite a bit. And like you mentioned, those articles are always the heavy ones as far as hits go. And with my blog, that's no different. If I write about OmniFocus or a productivity tool of any kind, then it's easily 3 and 4 times the number of clicks that come in on that. It's just the way it works. And I think some of that has to do with people that are looking for a solution to a problem that they don't want to define. And
Yep.
what I mean by that is that there's an issue at stake in that they need to make a decision on how they want to operate, and they need to decide, how do you want to use a task manager? That's not an easy thing to answer.
Right.
And it's not simple to just decide that I want a list maker and I want to be able to look at a list in context form. Like, if that's all you want, then you don't need OmniFocus. And today I've told 3 people that they should not buy OmniFocus. I'm sorry, Omni Group, but that's just the way it works, because they are new to GTD and they're new to list making in a digital format. They don't need on that. It's a different mindset. You can't handle that level of complexity in that. It's definitely a power user tool. And if you don't have the mindset to work with something on that level, then it doesn't work. A lot of this obstacle mindset is the same in that you really have to make the decision to see obstacles as they are and not as doom and gloom. Like,
Right.
you have to make the decision to have the mindset. Like, you have to understand that this is a way of thinking. You need to see it as what it is, make a decision to act on it, and then keep going. Like, don't let up. Like, just keep pressing on. He gives the story of Abraham Lincoln and how he dealt with all kinds of depression and constant internal struggles. You know, we've talked a lot about these guys who had all the external stuff. I think he was the one that he brought up that had a lot of the internal that I really resonated with, not because I've dealt with the same things, but it just made a lot of sense to me from a mental and mindset standpoint. But Abe Lincoln dealt with an awful lot. We have created a legend out of him, but he dealt with an awful lot of internal struggles between the depression and being ridiculed. And there was a lot of that he saw as highly negative. And he took that and used it to his advantage when he was president, because a lot of really bad things happened while he was president. And he didn't really freak out because he's like, oh, it's just, this is how you deal with it. Like, this is what's going on. And what I need to do isn't going to be a good thing. Like, there is no good thing to do here. But he's essentially picking between 2 bads. And he had dealt with that so much that he was a pro at it, as morbid as that is. But he was able to deal with it because he was used to that internal struggle. And I think there's a lot of that decision of, let's just decide that I'm going to see things this way, much the same way we need to make decisions on a lot of the other deals going on in our lives with, you know, clear down to what app do you use. You just have to make a decision on what you want to do with the situation up front and then act on that and not get too bent out of shape over it.
Yeah, and the Abraham Lincoln thing is really interesting because it's pretty well documented all of the failures that he had. But what was really cool about this book was, like you mentioned, the focus on the fact that he had to deal with the depression as well. So in addition to all the external things, he also had to overcome a bunch of internal things. So I thought that was really brought new light to the little bit of that I knew about Abraham Lincoln, and gave me a ton more respect for how he overcame his circumstances to become, you know, what history would call one of the greatest presidents of the United States in history.
Yeah. So what did you, because I struggle with this question, Mike, so I'm going to make you answer it first. Action items. When you were going through this, what did you see that stood out to you that you needed to take action on?
Well, the number one thing, and this is kind of hard for me to admit, but when things happen that are outside of the schedule or the system, I am going to try my hardest to not look at those things as negative. I'm a fairly passionate person by nature, not extroverted at all, but definitely passionate. And so when stuff happens that I don't like, I can quickly become emotional. And then once the emotions kick in, it's kind of downhill from there. I make it sound like I've got a huge problem with this. I think I do a fairly decent job of reeling it in, but I realize that that stuff does happen to me, and it's kind of my default reaction when things happen, even if it doesn't escalate to the point where I actually do something that I regret or I waste a bunch of time feeling a certain way. I recognize that this does happen more often than I want it to. So my big takeaway from this is to really try to, whenever anything happens, just tell myself this is okay. Let's look at this for what it really is and find the opportunity in this situation to move things forward.
I like that. And that's not easy to do, to just change the way you think of things.
Definitely not. This is going to be a process. So if you ask me next time what the follow-up is, probably still going to be struggling with this one.
Well, that's why I struggled with action items on this, because it's like, okay, here you go. Think this way. Well, okay. All right. I'll get on that. And I really came at this with I was trying to be humble with it, because I know that I really, really struggle with this, of taking the time to think it through, because I operate off of my intuition a lot and just kind of run with my feelings on things, because I've I've intentionally developed that over time so that I can make quick decisions. And that's only going to play out even more with some of the business decisions I'm making here recently, because it's going to put me in a spot where I need to make very big business decisions very, very quickly. And that's a good thing for me in the long run. But at the same time, it means that I'm going to need to learn to pause a little bit, because there's a lot of these things that can become very big obstacles, as Ryan is spelling out here. So the thing that I want to take away from this is pausing, because I move so darn fast that it's too fast in a lot of cases. As far as work goes, it's a very good thing, but outside of that, I know that I tend to do things way too quick. So the thing that I want to try to do, and I'm like you, this is going to be a challenge, I'm going to fail at this a lot, is whenever something happens and I would normally react negatively, is trying to pause and take a few seconds to think it through before something comes out of my mouth. So that's my attempt here, is to use that pause situation before I act on it, so that I can think it through and see can I see this in a positive light? Can I look for the positive lessons out of this, and then get going on it in a better way than I normally would have in my immediate reaction, if that can be related to it all.
Yeah, I like your term for that, pausing. That makes a lot of sense.
So, rating, how would you rate this, Mike?
Oh, easy 5 stars.
Yeah?
This is in my opinion, and maybe just because of where I am and in my particular situation, but this book really spoke to me, and I actually read the whole thing in one day. I just could not put this book down. So it's one of my favorite books of all time.
Nice. I was not that quick with it, but I did go through it in about 4 days, which I don't read that fast. So that'll tell you something. But as far as rating on my end, I was going to give it a 4. That's where I was going to land on it. And the only reason I'm not going 5 on it is because I felt like it did get a bit long, and there were parts in it that I felt like he was beating a dead horse. It's like, come on, let's go on. Let's keep going. So I felt like there was some situations that he could have shortened, and it was kind of difficult to keep going in some places. So that's purely my preference. So I would still highly recommend it, because I think that his style is very relatable, and I think he's very easy to read. it just, for me personally, I wanted him to slow down and, well, not slow down, but to get through things a little bit quicker. So that's the only reason I'm giving it a 4 out of 5.
Yeah, that's fair. And to be honest, that's kind of what I anticipated I would do when I
Mm-hmm.
picked this book. I was completely blown away and very pleasantly surprised by this book. So this is really like 5 plus 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 stars for me to say.
Well, you can
that I
offset me.
love-
How about that?
Yeah, sure, that works. But yeah, this was a great book for me. So definitely 5 stars for me.
Cool. So books coming up. We're going to step into Essentialism by Greg McKeown. McKeown? Have we figured out how to say it
Maybe.
yet?
No, we probably should by next time.
It's true. We'll just call him Greg. Okay, so it's by Greg. If you look up Essentialism by Greg, I'm sure you'll get there. Or you just click the link in the show notes. That'd be the easier way to do it. And then have you picked a book for after that so that people can pick it up?
You did. Threw it on there. This is one that I recently found out about, but I am really, really interested in.
Okay.
The More of Less by Joshua Becker.
Well, that'll be a good follow-up to Essentialism.
Yeah.
Because I feel like those two might be somewhat... So I'm not going to lie, I just finished reading Essentialism. I couldn't help myself, so I got a head start. So we could record that one right now if you want. But
I think I might read it first.
Okay, that'd be good. But no, that'll be a good follow-up. So that'll be the following. So we're doing Essentialism next, and then the More of Less following that.
So by the end of the next 2 podcast episodes, we'll both have 100 items or less in our possession and live in tiny houses, right?
Nope. I have too many books I want to keep around for that.
That's true. Okay, fair enough.
We should probably do that at some point. A show on how we read books, because I have a feeling because there's a lot of ways to do that. There's not like you don't just sit down and read a book. Like it doesn't work that way.
True. Yeah, we should definitely do that.
So that would deviate a little bit from what we normally do, but that would be interesting at least. So for the listeners, if you're interested in that, let us know, and we'll see what we can do about that.